We do not, as communities, we don't exist because someone hates us. Like, we don't exist because someone wants us gone, and like every conversation that we have doesn't have to be about that. Like, we're very excited to be here, and I think the way we're just going to do this is have a conversation for a little bit on this topic of authenticity and podcasting and the role that those two things play for us. And then we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers. So if thoughts are bubbling up to the surface for you, then write them down and we'll get those at the end. So I want to kick us off with offering a couple of definitions to consider for this conversation about authenticity. There's a researcher and academic named Brene Brown who defines it as the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we actually are. So I'm going to say that one more time. Authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we actually are. So one other definition that I want to invoke before asking these two lovely ladies to define it for themselves is of Muslim actor and comedian Dave Chappelle. He once said, "The hardest thing to do is to be true to yourself, especially when everybody is watching." So, ladies, what does authenticity mean to you? Do you feel like you're living an authentic life right now?
I think I'm living my best life. No, I'm kidding. I've really believe, I've had this opinion for a long time that 35 was going to be peak me, like best life ever. And 2 years ago, I was like, I have to take steps now in order to live that best life. So inshallah, make dua for me. Do I think I'm living my most authentic self now?
And like, what is that? What is authentic to you?
What is authentic to me? I think it took me a long time to actually realize what it meant to be authentic to me. We were talking earlier where I said I don't think I started living my most authentic self until about 27, 28. And I just went through, like everyone goes through phases, and I often reference like Malcolm X and like the autobiography and how it's broken down into these phases of life, and that always really connects to me because I grew up in Atlanta and went to an Islamic school K through 12, and then I went to college and like completely with all these different versions of me. I was Ghanaian at one point. I took off hijab. I would like wear things I wouldn't want my mother seeing me wear. And I was really struggling with this idea of like what it meant to be specifically Muslim when I was thinking about authenticity was a challenge I had. Like I didn't really have challenges around like race or gender. I was pretty comfortable in those, but the idea of what it meant to be Muslim is something, and I'm sure a lot of you experience this now in college of having this tension of, I was pretending to be someone in college that I wasn't at home. And then after college, I was like, whatever, I'm gonna do what I wanna do. Which then later on I realized wasn't really the right approach because I still wasn't being who I was, because I actually did care. And I cared about where I came from. I wanted my family to be proud of the person I was. I didn't want to feel like, I felt this kind of like hypocrisy about who I was, and I was trying to pretend like I didn't care. And so now I'm in this phase where I'm realizing I can be comfortable in the space I am, but also know that I have higher aspirations for who I want to be. And because I'm not at that point yet, I can't waste time shaming myself and pretending to my family, but I have to just be who I am in this space and identify those goals and actually be making steps to achieve, who I am, if that. So yeah, I'm being authentic to who I am and acknowledging where I am and where I want to be.
Living your best life. Yeah. Zahra, are you living your authentic life? What is that?
I am. I think whenever I think about these questions of authenticity, I feel the sort of the siloed spotlight, and I self-identify as bisexual, feminist, Muslim, Iranian American, and basically the anti-Trump. Boom, 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 boom. Not a regime that's a fan of any of those things. And so then, I'm very aware of the fact that while I live my authentic life, I am up against an incredible establishment that would like to not see me survive that. And I feel like we have to give ourselves a lot of credit for the fact that we are under that spotlight, and under that eye, under his eye, for the handmaiden.
I caught it. Thank you.
So I am a comedian. I live and die by laughter. So thank you. But at the same time, like I do feel like I'm living my best life. Like I am being who I am, and I'm touring the country, and I'm talking to folks, and talking about sexuality, talking about practice, observance, faith, politics, comedy, and I'm still Netflixing.
You're winning.
I'm winning.
What about you, Mecca?
Oh, I didn't realize I had to answer that one.
Yeah, I'm throwing it out there. I feel like we've been sharing very different experiences of how
true.
we interpret what it means to be authentic in our lives.
So authenticity to me, first of all, is about yourself. It's not about other people. It's not about policing other people's behaviors or their expressions of their authenticity or measuring like how inauthentic or authentic they are. Similar to Ikhlas, it took some time because you're figuring out like who are you and who are you performing for. And so for me, the authenticity question became more easily able to answer it when I stopped performing for other people or reacting to what other people around me needed. And it became more about, okay, like, how's this making me feel? Like, what am I really trying to like put forth like in this space? So I think like through our show, through our friendship, just like through everything, I really do feel like life is way too short to spend a lot of time and energy pretending, or to spend a lot of time and energy acting on behalf of the desires of others. And so I'm trying to really implement that. And it's made me a much happier, healthier person. My credit score has gone up. My bank account looking good. So highly recommend it.
Also winning. You're winning.
We're all winning.
We're all winning.
I love that credit score part. I gotta get some tips from you after this.
Mindfulness is also hella Muslim, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
I just want to say that. I just want to put that out there. Like, because I feel like I have always in my whole life gotten flack for praying 5 times a day. Like, why 5 times a day? That seems like so much. What a way to indoctrinate a people. 5 times a day, 5 times a day. But then, like, when people talk about yoga, they're like, yoga saves my life.
Yeah.
Every day, 6 a.m.
It's totally true.
That's really intense.
Come on. Like, I have child's pose 5 times a day.
So I also think this is something that I wanted us to talk about a little bit. Clearly you can tell we're podcasters, right? We're like asking each other questions. What do you think?
And I want to highlight that who's missing from my left hand side here is my co-host Taz. We have the podcast together. Good Muslim, Bad Muslim. And she couldn't be here. She's doing do-gooder things in Boston. That's what she does. Saving the world.
Something I've been thinking about, so this past December, have any of you listened to WBEZ's Making Oprah? Yeah. Oh my God, okay, if you haven't listened to it, it's only like 3 episodes, really fascinating, very interesting, and it made me think a lot about, sorry, I'm an Oprah stan, so I apologize if anyone is not. But they do this whole series where they really break down how Oprah came into her authentic self. And she started off doing media and production, right? Having to do what other people wanted her to do, just in order to like break into that business. And they were doing like trashy things on the Oprah show, like Jerry Springer type stuff, like bring their husband and then bring the side bae and the wife and put them all in one space and let's see what happens. And so they did this one episode where the wife kind of just like broke down because she had no idea she was being ambushed. And Oprah had this moment where she was like, I never want to do that again. And I don't care at what cost for ratings. I know Sally Jessy Raphael is out there doing it. I know they're doing it, but that's not what this show is about. And I think making those statements where you're really like, I know the consequences of not being who my audience wants me to be, and that's okay, because maybe I don't want them. Maybe I'm targeting a new one. Or I bring this audience on a journey along with me to reach their higher self and to think about things. And so as we are people that are invested in media, I want to pose this question of, how do you do that? How do you make those hard decisions about who you want to be publicly, right? It's one thing to do this introspection of like, man, I'm super shady. I know I'm not where I need to be. But like, you're like, I'm going to pretend on Instagram like I am, like, And so it's, how do you make those decisions when you're thinking about your public life? And yeah, I'm going to look this way and want to be answer.
Well, for me, I really ask that question a lot about who's my audience. And to find that, I think about, what is it to speak to my truth? Because especially as a comedian, you're told and taught that you should be able to speak to every audience, everybody is your audience. And what I've come to learn is that what that actually means is you should be able to speak to a wide audience. And because of where we are with the internets, that series of tubes, the dated reference already. It's like already people are like, I was born after the Daily Show, so I don't really know. Like, who's Jon Stewart? The ability to be able to say, no, that's not the entire audience, actually, and no, not all Muslims. Hashtag, let's start that one. On behalf of all Muslims, I would like to say some of us are not into blank, and there's this way that in 2008, for me, my identity as a Muslim was really solidified for me. I know a lot of people talk about that happening for them in 9/11, during 9/11. For me, it was with the election of the president. It racialized Islam for me. And I suddenly had to learn about racism. What? Because up until that point, I was raised in a very affluent white suburb where racism was a really bad thing that really bad people do.
Did not exist in the suburb.
Not in the, yeah. I'm nice to everybody. Was the whole mentality. And just some people just have a really hard time with welfare. Is oh, that's a microaggression, but also kind of macro, and actually racism, that you're also saying some people. And I didn't know that I was being targeted my whole upbringing. I just thought, there's something wrong with me. I'm not likable enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not cool enough. I'm not hip enough. I'm not, I need to wear more Guess jeans. It's something I'm not doing. I should have more sleepovers. I should have more pajama parties. I should have pepperoni pizza with my friends. It's something I'm not doing, and to discover racism for what it actually is, and all its layers and all its manifestations, because all of a sudden I had to explain myself on stage as a comedian, and people will ask me, why do you start by saying, I'm a feminist Muslim Iranian American comedian who identifies as bisexual and eats pork sometimes and drinks and is married to an atheist white infidel man, but he doesn't drink and he doesn't eat pork, and is he more Muslim than me? My name is Zahra. Why do you start that way? Why do you start that way? And it's because when I was doing comedy in 2008, I would get asked after shows, I would just notice that my audience was distracted, and then they would be like, how come you don't talk about being Mexican? And I was like, well, because I'm not Mexican. Well, how come you don't talk about being Sicilian? I'm not Sicilian. Well, what about Greek? How come you don't talk about being Greek then? I'm Greek. Where's your Greek pride? What's going on? And so then I just started to have to, I would just stand at the, friggin' top. And then there it is. And now I'm going to continue, and let that sit. I forget the question.
I think you answered the question. It was how have you come to share yourself publicly?
Well, see, there it is. It's in 2008, that's when I started to feel the heat and the spotlight, the accusations. you know, are you Arab? Are you Muslim? Are you, you know, as an accusation. And on stage, as a comedian, at bars, you know, with a bunch of friends, where like, especially as an Iranian kid, any Iranians? Hey!
There's literally one.
She cried. Just had to do that. Y'all listening? Anyway, I felt all this pressure to have to explain everything all the time. And as an Iranian kid, coming here, you know, my parents came here just before the hostage crisis broke out, the revolution broke out, and they purposefully didn't talk to me about politics ever. You know, and like the community that I grew up in was always like, you know, if anybody asks, you're Italian. You're Italian, you're Italian, you're Italian. You know, but like I thought we were Iranian. Iran is in Italy.
Now, did you have to learn Italian to keep up with this?
That is the blessing of growing up trying to be a white American kid, is you don't have to learn about geography or languages.
Doesn't matter.
Or foreign policy. And I was just this like privileged white kid, as far as I knew, eating spaghetti. And then all of a sudden it was like, you know, tell us about the Iranian Revolution. Can you speak to that? Talk about hijab, and can you break that down? And can you talk about how do you reconcile feminism with Islam? How do you reconcile that? How do you reconcile that? I'm just like, I'm sure somebody's writing a PhD somewhere.
More than one person.
Yeah, so it's very much in reaction to.
I think for me, oh man, how did I come to be more public with who I am? I think Ikhlas was actually a really big part of that, and she didn't pay me to say this. So for those of you who listen to the show, you know that Ikhlas and I are really good friends. We grew up in real life IRL. We both are from Atlanta. We both grew up Black and Muslim in different communities, but still with a lot of overlap. And then we went to college together. And if you know your college friends, you know that they go through some things with you. They see through some phases, some things that don't make it to Facebook or Instagram. And so we got to know each other real well. And through being friends with her, this was like the one friend that I had that I never had to code switch with. I never had to explain a thing. If I was stressed about something, if I was embarrassed about something, if there was a part of myself, you know, like, oh, it's Ramadan and I don't know where to do iftar and there's this party later, can I just break my fast like on the way there? And like, you know, like I never had to explain it to her. She just got it. And there's something about being in the presence of someone who just takes you as you are and gets it. And like once you experience that, you never go back to picking and choosing like which piece of myself is worthy of presenting in this space again. Because like a phrase that Ikhlas often uses, like, nobody has time for that. When I'd be like, oh, I don't know if my parents will approve if I do this, or I don't know if the community will approve if I do that. And she'd be like, no one has time to pretend like their whole life. And thinking about, okay, what else could I accomplish if I stopped pretending and just started being? You know, now I have a podcast. Like, you're able to do a lot and create a lot, and you have so much more energy to put things into the world that you feel should be there. And through that process, you're able to help other people come to terms with like who they are. And like if you're not making the world a place that's easier for other people to exist in it, then like what are you really doing? So for me, like that story of like how I have internalized authenticity like really begins with like my friendship with Ikhlas and like wanting to create a platform and a show where other people could maybe come and be like, maybe I don't have to code switch. Like maybe I can say my inshallahs and mashallahs and not translate it, and like that's totally fine, and people will pick up on like what that means. And so that's been really cool.
I'll add to that of like one of the reasons of wanting to start the podcast is we had a lot of friends who would have this thing where you're jumping from like A to Z and forgetting all the letters in between, where it's like, I don't pray right now. Now I'm going to pray 5 times a day, plus sunnah, plus fast on Thursday, plus, and it was like, you don't have to do so much. Like, don't let that guilt weigh you down where you can't be consistent and like reach your goals. And I think that's something that we both early on struggled from, where you like just feel so guilty about the state that you're in, and you like think that you have to go all the way down 100 instead of like being consistent. And I mean, not just about being Muslim, but just life in general, right? Where you're in a job that you don't like, or your classes aren't going well, and it's like, that's okay. So let's just get to where we need to be, and we can do that together. And yeah, that's just something.
I will say, like, we've been talking like all roses and sunshine about authenticity and how like liberating it is to just like be yourself like all the time, right? Like winning. All we do is win no matter what. But like, what are the consequences of keeping it real? Like, let's be real. There's like a lot of Muslim people with opinions on the internet. There's like a lot of like, internet sheikhs who are like, sister, you have
Internet sheikhs. That's my new favorite term of all time.
Yeah, who are literally like, go like banish yourself into a corner because like you have like one strand of hair.
Oh my God. Why am I confined to this table? I just want to do a star pose.
Exactly. But like, how have you dealt with that? Like, we are Muslims with public platforms that talk about being Muslim, identify as Muslim like first and foremost, and there are consequences to being like, I am who I am, and I said what I said. So like, what's that been like?
I feel like you have so many thoughts.
Yeah, do you have thoughts? I'm not sure.
Has that happened to you?
Well, actually, I want to push that question back to you guys because, so here's the thing, when you have a girlfriend podcast as Muslims, then you're professional Muslims,
Yes.
which all Muslims are professional Muslims all of the time. But like perpetual unpaid Muslim internship exists all of the time. Like even while you're sleeping, you wake up and you're like, shit, I missed 100 emails in the form of tweets about Muslimness and I'm behind already in my other day job. When you have a podcast and you are being your authentic self, then it goes beyond just people sort of asking you about like, what's your self-care like? And enters into the realm of, so what are your opinions on the latest foreign policy of like blah, 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 blah that's happening in the Muslim planet. So for Taz and I, we went viral before we had an episode.
Yeah, I remember.
So we were on PRI during, it was Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And for the entire week, our interview was the #1 click. And it was like, oh, Islam, the new racism. And, oh, it's new. The conversation of like, are we post-racial America? Was like, still fresh. And we were being asked like, so, in your podcast, like what kind of segments do you have? And we were like, when we record it, we'll tell you. And get asked constantly to speak about things that we know nothing about. And despite the fact that we're a girlfriend podcast, are dubbed a news and educational forum.
Yeah.
Which is like, well, we're just very smart women who have smart conversations.
Yeah.
It doesn't make us experts. It's not a news source, which was the title of one of our episodes. For you guys, how has that been? Tell us about it.
I would say, I don't think that people tag us in that news and informational source. I think people do see us, maybe not as a girlfriend podcast, but kind of just like a friend podcast.
What is the difference there?
Well, I would say like, it's not just like women that listen to us, right? Yeah, where it's like one of the goals with the show was to feel like we were in your living room. We wanted to make it the conversations that people are having in their living rooms, but not having publicly, and most likely not publicly, right? Because you are being asked to respond to things in the news constantly. And so we were like, actually, we don't care about that. That's not what this show is about. We want to talk about what we want to talk about. So I think we often don't give people, I don't think people think about us as experts in that category, but when we are asked for interviews, like recently, someone wanted to talk about like relationships with me, and I was like, yeah, I have a relationship. I can talk about that. But I think out of the both of us, Mecca has been more of the newsy one. But that was like pre-podcast where Mecca has such smart opinions on politics.
I don't know where this is going. But yeah, I think definitely there is, just outside of even our specific podcast, when you are a minority, especially when you're a minority at the intersection of multiple identities, who has strung two sentences together before, people get really excited. They get really excited, so they're like, let's talk about everything, because I don't know when I'm going to find another one of you again. And so they start to come at you, like, do you want to talk about, you know, the Syrian civil war? And like, that was a question that we got once. And I was like, I can talk about it as a concerned citizen, but like, I am not a foreign policy expert. And I think that in this moment where there is a lot of pressure and like demands on like the types of questions that Muslims are allowed to answer, you have to be very careful about not painting a broad stroke on like the experiences that we have and the expertise that we have, because we're experts on our own experiences. We're, I would say, somewhat experts on the American context and like the specific communities that we come from. But it's been a discipline of practice of staying in our lane and making sure that, you know, I know people who are doing amazing work in foreign policy who you should talk to like about those things.
But the other thing is people don't stay in their lane. Yeah. And I think that's why reporters will think that they can ask those questions. Yeah.
When we're terrified, we want something simple. And there is a $206 million fear industrial campaign, Islamophobia campaign, to create that fear, generate that fear, reinforce that fear. And so then it makes sense to me that everybody wants whatever is simple. Mm-hmm. But if you think about like when you know, are shopping, you're shopping. Right? Like we like different things. We like buffets. We like different opportunities. We like different choices, but not when we're scared. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately because I think that that informs so much when we don't remember where people are coming from is that they're terrified and they blame you. You know, they're blaming me in that moment. They want me to answer for it.
Yeah, even thinking about like Muslims with opinions on the internet, like I think what drives a lot of their angry comments is fear.
Yeah, you know, which doesn't make it okay. Yeah. I want to be clear on that.
Yeah, it doesn't make it okay, but it is fear. It's like we have one chance to like get this thing right, so like you need to get it right in a way that like I believe is right, and I just don't think that's necessary, or like all of that is productive. And so like thinking about like authenticity and the role that it plays in this is like, people confuse acknowledging like complexity and acknowledging like your flaws with glorifying them. And those aren't necessarily the same things. Like Islam and being Muslim should not be a means for you to hate yourself or for you to be like beating yourself up about like how you're not fitting into a box. Like it's an incredibly like varied tradition with like a little something for everybody, like no matter where you are on the spectrum. And it's really cool that you can constantly like throughout your life find different things about it that resonate for you, whether it's, you know, like prayer as mindfulness practice or like something else. And so I think a lot about the role that shame and guilt plays in the way that we like police other people's behavior. And like guilt can be productive because it's essentially like measuring up your values with like something that you've done and that like psychological dissonance that happens. Like, am I the person that I think I am? And you can answer that and say yes, no, okay, what am I going to do about it? But shame is the belief that something is wrong with you and that you are unworthy of loving and belonging. And so like I really am not for like the shaming that happens when people are afraid that there's only one chance that we have to like be Muslim publicly, because what you're really doing when you're shaming others and sort of silencing certain perspectives and opinions is saying like you don't belong here. Like I get to decide like who is Muslim and who is not. Like you're not in that. And like none of us get to decide that.
Even though I think we do that. You know, it's like you can't be like in media or just a person and like not shade another person. You know? So it's like, you know, I'll look out in the landscape and I'm like, the way they're doing that podcast, no, that is not speaking to me. I don't think so. Or like, you know, you'll watch a TV program and I mean, right, like people had all of this backlash about the Big Sick, about Aziz Ansari, who is like, I'm not even Muslim, y'all. And it's, you know, you receive it. And so it's, we sit up here and we say it, but I will be the first to admit that like I shade others and I deeply critique the work that they produce because it's not how I would do it.
Critiquing, I feel like critiquing is very different than like homophobia.
Yes.
Right? Like,
yes.
you know what I mean? Like, it's one thing to say you can't exist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to ostracize, to alienate, to shame, to silence, versus to critique.
That's a good point, yeah.
Critiquing engages in a dialogue. Like, how else are we going to discover, you know, what is going on here? What do I not agree with? What is it about this that's bothering me?
Yeah.
I feel like is always bringing me into a conversation and making me a part of a community that I wasn't a part of before. Now I am, because you're upset about something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. It makes me feel better about all the shady texts I sent my
What did you call shake? What is it?
Internet shade.
Internet
There's a lot of them.
Were you internet shaking?
No, I don't care about the shakes. Did we want to open it up for questions?
Do we want to? Do we want to hear?
Sorry, it's clearly I'm not the logistics person on our podcast.
How are we on time?
We're good. Yeah, we have like 20 minutes. I think we had one just like closeout question, and then we'll open it up to the audience.
Yeah, I remember. Okay. This is what you don't hear on the show. This is like what I edit out.
I'm like, let's take that one. Let's run that back.
And I'm like, that fact was not right. Delete. Yeah, so before we closed out, we were thinking a lot about like college earlier, and we're like, dang, that was a long time ago. And we're like, basically we summed it up with like, yeah, hot mess, a wreck. Like just did not look good, like ate too many like bagels time and time again. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how y'all are doing it. Okay, sorry, I'm like having flashbacks. Anyway, we were thinking like, man, when someone came to speak to us, like what advice were we looking, what were we like seeking in college? And I want to open that up to y'all first, because I got to think about an answer. So what were you seeking, and like what advice did you hope to like get when, right? Because in college you have like a million speakers that come to you. So what were you hoping to hear?
I wanted my ex-boyfriend to say, I do love you. And I have been making mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake, and let's be together forever. And I was just waiting for that for 4 years. It didn't happen. Actually, no, 2 years, whatever, I got over him. Yeah, how about you?
Is that your real answer? No. This is not what you're leaving this group with. You must wind that back.
I will say, when I was going to college, I was struggling a lot. It was the first time that I was away from my family, but I was too cool to even admit that anywhere in myself, in my consciousness or subconsciousness at all. And I was struggling a lot. And I was going to therapy, and I had a white woman who was my therapist, and she kept telling me about Kali energy. And yeah, right? I was just like, Kali, access my inner Kali energy. Okay, it's Hinduism, I'm Muslim, you're a hippie, I don't understand. And, you know, she was talking a lot about how I needed to separate myself from my family. She kept saying that you're trying to break free from your mother and become your own person, break free from your father, become your own person, and leave your father's house. I was like, actually, no, I'm trying to find my parents. You know, I've been a kid all this time, and they've been my folks. And, I mean, this makes me emotional every time, but I think it's different when you're a POC, you know, and your family's constantly under attack. It's really scary. And my whole life I felt distanced from my parents. You know, my whole life I was looking for ways to help my family be more like this other family. And so looking back, what I was really looking for in my college experience was, now I'm physically away from you, and I'm scared, and I don't know how to tell you I'm scared. And in the meantime, who am I? You know, I don't know who I am. You didn't tell me. You know, because I didn't grow up with that. You know, and also looking for my ex-boyfriend to say.
Yeah. Man, a lot of that resonates with me. I think when I was so something that you should know about me is I'm a really big fan of reinvention. I think if I had made like some different decisions, I could have been like a con artist, like Catch You Me If You Can. It's like my favorite movie. But I love going into new spaces and deciding who I want to be and like becoming that person. So it's like I'm starting a new job. I'm like super disciplined with my time. I don't take no mess in meetings. So like my first meeting, I'm like, I don't take no mess. And like all of a sudden, like the thing that I present to them becomes the thing that I am. And then I have this like, you know, pressure to keep it up. So then I become that person. And it's worked out really well for me. And I started it in college. And I had not so great like motives in college because I was like, I'm going to be this like cool black girl on campus. Like that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be the girl that everyone was like, hey, Becca's here. Like,
She was that girl.
I succeeded. I became that person. That was really great. But kind of like what I was saying earlier was depending on where I was a different person. So I was literally like ripping pieces of myself up. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna go to this like Black Student Union meeting and be this person. I'm gonna go to this like Muslim event and like be this person. I'm gonna like go home and be this person. And I had all of this anxiety about like, who am I becoming? And now that I'm gone, you know, my parents spent all this time teaching me about myself, you know, like teaching me about the myself that they wanted me to know I was. And then I left and I decided who I wanted to be. And the biggest fear for me was like, what if my authentic self is someone that my family doesn't like? Like, what if my authentic self is someone that my community like doesn't like? And so that was a really hard process for me. So authenticity for me has like been a way of saving myself and making sure that I don't get lost in the wind of the world because it's blowing out here and people want you to be different things. And so I do want to offer like just an exercise, if you will, to take away from this because there are some questions that you can ask yourself to kind of fuel the practice of authenticity. And like one is if you're in an interaction with someone and you're trying to figure out like whether you want to be your authentic self, ask yourself, what am I afraid would happen if I shared my experience with this person? Like what am I holding back? The second question is, how will I feel later? How will I feel later if I don't share this? The third is, if I wasn't afraid, what would I want to say? And the fourth is, how can I share this with you and become more vulnerable? So those are some questions that I like offer to you to really think about, like really question your fears and then really weigh that up against like, later on, am I going to have like a deep-seated regret about like not really reacting in a way that was true to my values, that really expressed what needed to be expressed? And sometimes you'll find that like you don't need to express it. You're like, the risks outweigh the benefits. I don't want this person bothering me. It's just like, I'll let it slide, and that's totally fine. But if you're trying to build up like an understanding of who your authentic self is, like really start to monitor like your reactions to the situations that you're in and start to question like, what's holding me back from really expressing how I'm feeling in this current state? So, Ikhlas?
Yeah, mine is pretty quick. I think when I came from high school, I was like model student, like good grades, whatever. And I got to college and I was crushed. I failed the math test, so I wasn't allowed to take any like math or science courses until I took a 101. I eventually ended up taking bio, and I was failing the class. I did not realize I was failing the class. And a professor came in and she told me, hey, you're failing the class. And I was like, oh, wow, man. And she was just like, you know, you got to meet with me every week. Like, how do you study? And I was like, I study, like. And she was like, yeah, what's your practice for studying? Are you like in a study group or something? I was like, no. And she was like, you should be. Go find one. And
that's
like,
awesome that she came to you.
Yeah, she did. Yeah, but it's also like, who wants this like dumb black girl like in their study group? I found some people that did want me. And yeah, I had this like lab partner who like didn't want to be partners with me, and I actually did not know how to look through the microscope. I was not a science major, but anyway, I was a religion major. But I had all of these experiences that were breaking me down, and you know, this didn't happen until after I graduated. My mom was like, I thought you were going to come home and you just like weren't going to finish. And it was hard for me because my identity had been wrapped in like how good of a student I was, and I really liked academics. I liked studying, and to have these experiences that told me that I wasn't good at it. And then, you know, I went to grad school and I still was wrapped up in I'm a really good student. Like, I'm really smart. Like, even though like I had these experiences that broke me down, but I would have wanted someone to tell me like, your identity doesn't have to be wrapped up in the things that you do. And I really needed to hear that. Like, they were just things that I did, but it wasn't who I was. And so after grad school, I was like, bye. And like now I've been able to like really reshape like, what does Ikhlas like? Like, who does she want to be? Like, a lot of the times I was just doing things because that fit the model of what I was supposed to be doing in order to be this like academic person. Tell me. You don't have to be the things that you do.
Awesome. So I think we just have a couple minutes for questions. So I think we'll take, raise your hand and we'll take all of them and then see what we have time to answer. So are there any questions?
We're on video, by the way, so you better raise some hands.
So your discussion about reinvention really spoke to me. So I was wondering, Mecca, why do you think you did that? Because I feel the same way when I was in college, I would have done as well. And do you think that's because of, you have these identities and you're trying to express them in different spaces or with different people, so that will cause this like reshifting? I think with me, it's more of like one space or one group of friends doesn't quite encapsulate everything that I am, and that's what sometimes causes this reinvention. And it's a little bit fake, and I realize that, but I think it's also like this is how I feel whole. So just want to kind of get your thoughts on that.
Thanks. Other questions? We're going to take them all and then answer them. Yes.
I thought what you guys were saying about how the platform that you're given is only in response to like a specific question, that's very interesting, because it seems that in order for us to respond to these questions, we're being forced to like pimp out our narratives for consumption. And in pimping out these narratives, we're also told that our pain, our joy, our vulnerability is no longer ours. But sometimes you also want to like reclaim those things. But it seems like when you try to reclaim these things, like the spaces that you're given are taken away. So I want to know, like, how do you push back against like tokenization while also being able to hold the space that you're given? Or are we forced to reimagine and recreate new spaces for ourselves?
Ooh, okay. That is quite a question. Thank you. Others? Yes.
So my question is basically, how do we, you talked a lot about identity, a lot about authenticity, a lot about like separating yourself from politics and from these accusations. How do we create spaces where Muslims are not constantly discussing what's on the news? Because I feel like everywhere I go, we're talking about what Trump said. We're talking about our Muslim identities and like, how do we fit in? Like, why can't we just be like people? Like, why can't we just like talk about school or like talk about, relationships or talk about, anything else? Like, we always have to talk about how politicized we are, like our identities and how it fits into the American narrative. Like, how do we create spaces where that's not what we're talking about?
I want to answer that right now. Look for the people who are doing that work. Everyone on this panel is doing that work. Look for the people doing that work. Listen to the work that they're doing. Watch the work that they're doing. Support it. Buy it. Spread it. However you can to support it. Be a part of it. Be a part of that conversation. Let us know what you think. When we're talking on behalf of all Muslims. Reach out. I think too often we're trying to talk to the accusers. Why? They don't deserve that. We're not their audience. They don't get that. And there are incredible people doing incredible narrative work to make that happen and to answer those questions and to find those solutions. And we need critical mass to have that impact.
So yeah, I guess we can just go straight into the question. Sorry, I think there was one more. Go ahead.
So it's very wonderful seeing three powerful women talk about these issues related to our identity as Muslims. And I think I want to touch upon how we have these conversations with our POC male counterparts.
Easy, just like this. Blah, 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 blah.
I understand it though.
Yeah.
And then we have one more.
Okay, sorry, one more, and then I think we have to
Yeah,
close
I
it.
just wanted to add a different kind of question, because I feel like whenever we have these panels, it always then becomes about this like identity, how do we push back? How do we create spaces? But I also want to talk about like your specific work. Like there are Muslims doing this kind of work, but why specifically podcasts? What do you feel like? What is it about podcasts that? Why did you choose the space? What brought you to that space?
Okay.
About the medium.
Great. So I think I'm going to do these in a total random order. I want to start with the question that Zahra started to answer. How do we create spaces where Muslims aren't constantly discussing what's on the news?
Yeah, and I think I can actually combine that with your question. I am always a fan of like Muslims entering into pop culture. It's something that I'm like super obsessed with, and I look for Muslim artists that are doing that type of work. And so early on in the podcast, we had on Najla Mutman, who is a filmmaker, and she's making this film about jinn.
Wearing a South by Southwest.
Yeah, she's doing South by Southwest, and she's filmmaking, and there are so many Muslims out there doing this pop culture work that we don't amplify. And so, I mean, they're pretty underground, but I am a huge 100% believer that that is what shifts the narrative. Not having more Muslim doctors, lawyers, people on CNN, like, I don't give a damn about them. That's just fitting into this crazy fear-inducing cycle that never ends. But when you're doing, I'm sorry, no shade to anybody in here
that
studying.
Was so much
yeah, like keep studying, keep doing whatever you're majoring in. We absolutely need doctors, okay? But I think when we're talking about narrative shifting, that's what does it. Like comedians, right? You get to enter into this space and complicate things, but also make people laugh and think critically. Like that is powerful. And one of the reasons I did a podcast is, I mean, I had some downtime and I wanted to have my mom's story on record. My mom converted to Islam when she was in her 20s, and so I'm currently exiting my 20s. But I was like, I would never choose to be Muslim in my 20s. Like I'm gonna turn up. And I was like, who does that? Let's talk about it. Because she never really told us the whole story. And so I did this recording, and my siblings texted me and they're like, oh my God, I did not know that. And from there, I was just like, wow, this is such a powerful medium. And honestly, I never thought anyone would listen to it except, no, my family members are super shady. I thought 2 of my family members were gonna listen to it. But it grew into this thing. And I also just, if you didn't catch it earlier, I mean, I love Oprah. I want a talk show. So if anyone out here is got some connects, some plugs. But yeah, also I'm a narcissist a little bit, and I like the sound of my own voice.
One quick tag for the shade. I just want to let everybody know, 60% of the comedians that I work with, 60%, I work with a lot of comedians and very famous and very well known, are doctors, lawyers,
Yes.
and engineers.
Wow.
But they're white guys, they're straight white guys, and they get to make lateral moves and fail upwards. Just a heads up. Just a heads up.
For sure. And I think this question about, how do we, create these spaces and where we're not constantly reacting to things is you can't. Just don't react to things. My favorite part of having a podcast is when Ikhlas and I sit down and we're like, what do we want to talk about today? What's on our mind? What's on your heart? Have you, we talk so much about, career development and growth. What are you trying? She was just telling us about this, great book about building good habits. And, these are things that we care about. And so ask yourself, who are you performing for? Are you giving a service to yourself? Or are you performing for others? And if that balance is really you're just constantly putting out energy for other people, that's depleting. People are taking things away from you. And the process of creating something, it's nourishing. It feeds your soul and your spirit. So the answer to how is just do it, try, fail. If you listen to season 1 of our podcast, oh my God. We've never breathed into a microphone before. It's so
I want to say I was a season 1 fan. I don't know.
But it's also we did not think to come up with questions before the interview.
We don't have to get into that. But the point being, just try it. The worst thing that you can do is improve. Yeah. And I think that's really important. So I do want to go to a couple of the other questions. So we talked about reactive platforms. How to push back against tokenization while holding space for ourselves.
I feel like we answered that.
Yeah, I think that was pretty well answered.
We solved that.
There are a lot of men of color that are willing to engage and have those conversations, so start with them. you don't like, it's like people are always trying to go to the hardest thing. They're like, oh my God, in Trump's America, like what are we gonna do? Like let's go like talk to our racist uncle and demand that he like does X, Y, and Z. And it's like, bro, like okay, let's calm down. Like, do you have a white friend? Like, do you have like someone that's like a gateway to like some of that more contentious dialogue? So I think like with men of color, it's very similar. Like, if there are guys that are like, hey, like this Me Too movement, like I don't get it. You know, like I don't get, like, am I implicated in it? Like, have I sexually harassed a woman before? Like, that's a powerful question that men are starting to ask themselves. And like, if you have the space and the emotional capacity to like engage with them, then like do it. I don't recommend starting with the guy that's like, this is all a lie, women lie, like you're not human, because like spending all of your time like convincing someone that you're human, to me, is not time well spent. That's time taken away from like you creating something beautiful in the world.
Yeah, and I would say engage the men that are, even if they're not doing the work, that it's things that they're thinking about. So, like, we wanted to talk about sexual harassment specifically within the Muslim community, and we had a sheikh come on who we know personally, and we asked him, you know, difficult questions around gender, around scholarship, around the power that you can have as a spiritual leader. And we're like, we wanted to have him on. I mean, right, you needed to have a male to come on to have that conversation. And we had it, and it was good. And I mean, our husbands are POC. And so, you know, I think we do the show so we can amplify women who are doing work that wouldn't normally be asked to speak somewhere. And so they make up the majority of our guests. But we do always look for opportunities for men out there, and not always POC. Like, we had white men on there, and we had a white woman talking about what it means to be white and Muslim in America. And so just thinking that, like, what conversation can you have, and who makes sense to have that conversation with? Like, we go through a lot of people and we're like, nope, nope, nope. And then we're like, yeah, actually.
Yeah, for sure. I did want to address the first question that I got about like, why do I reinvent myself? Mostly because it's fun. I'm a really big believer in like the growth mindset, and so you know they say there's a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. A growth mindset person thinks like you can just grow and like you can like become the people like that you want to be. And so I think that in a productive sense and like putting forth positive traits, that's a reason why I do it. I think like in the most like destructive sense, it's been insecurity. So being insecure about like being black, like not being rich, being Muslim, and like not wanting people to like assign characteristics to me. So I'm like, I'm just going to like be a thing. So I was like, I'm the funny Muslim, you know, like I'm the like cool black. Like I like, you know, just decided like this is what I'm going to be as like a defense mechanism. So I don't recommend that, but I do think that for me, my reinvention is like a part of just like trying to be a better person, and trying to, and now it's more internally driven versus like being externally driven. Any other thoughts? Cool.
No, y'all have been great. Thanks for like sitting and listening. Sorry, I do have one more thing. Since we all are podcasters, if you could subscribe to our show.
Take out your phone.
Yeah, seriously.
Identity Politics, and not only subscribe to Good Muslim, Bad Muslim, but also leave us reviews. That's how people get to know more about the work that we do. So rate and review us.